Sorry, Abby, I might spoil something in Project Hail Mary, so just
Go
close
for
your
it.
ears.
La 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 la
But
la.
like that is also a film where sex is kind of erased.
Mm.
Did you find that? I mean, you can
Damn, I
always
was
read
really
it.
expecting so much sex going into that film. That was my number one.
I've also heard people talk a little bit. I haven't read
About
the
a
book,
guy
but I've
who's
heard
heard sex. Sorry. So sorry.
anything else.
No.
About
We're
sex?
good. We're good.
Okay.
My rant is done.
Welcome to Amy and I'm Amy Matthews, and I'm here today with Justina Ashford,
Hi.
Abby Guy,
Hi.
and Millie Heffernan.
That's me.
And we are meeting today on Ghana land in beautiful Adelaide, Tanzania. And we'd like to pay our respects to elders past and present and extend those respects to any First Nations people listening today. And we'd also like to acknowledge that this land is a place of powerful storytelling and knowledge through storytelling, and we're really honoured to be part of that today. So we're doing Queer Sci-Fi this month. June is Queer Sci-Fi month, which I'm kind of excited about. I think I said at the beginning of the year, I have not read sci-fi for a very long time. I read a lot when I was a kid, and then I've only just sort of come back to it lately, but I haven't read a lot. But you guys seem to be big readers of sci-fi, judging by all the
Just a
books
little bit.
surrounding us.
I'm certainly a watcher of sci-fi, even more than a reader. So.
Yeah, I think that's true of me too. I've probably seen more film.
For a while, like most of my like recreational reading I was doing was sci-fi, but I tend to go through like phases where I'll be reading heaps of sci-fi and then I'll switch to reading heaps of like historical romance and then switch to something else.
I only just started reading science fiction like en masse this year.
Interesting.
Yeah.
What have you been reading?
I started with Becky Chambers. I read Monk and Robot series, and that really got me into science fiction. So then I picked up Martha Wells' All Systems Red series. And I feel like because both of those are like novellas, they're like shorter books, that it's easier to get through. They're fun. And
It's really booming at the moment. I'm always really interested in when things boom and why. Like, clearly there's like a hunger for sci-fi. Like, I did go see Project Hail Mary. That's like the only film I've seen for months. But
when this comes out, I will have seen it. But at the current moment in time, I have not seen it. I'm planning on seeing it in a couple of days.
It was so great.
I loved it.
So good.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I was thinking, like, if I list my top favourite films, there's so many of them are sci-fi. Like, grew up on Star Wars, obviously. I know there's debate over whether it's like sci-fi, space opera, but for me,
Things can be two things.
Yeah,
I'll put it in space. Isn't that the same thing?
Yeah. We can discuss.
Okay.
And then like Alien, like the Alien franchise was like one of my favourite things growing up. I watched that over and over. Were you guys Star Trek people?
No.
No.
Yes, I was, because my parents were. But my parents watched a lot of sci-fi series, which is why that's a lot of my sci-fi base, like Star Trek, Red Dwarf, Babylon 5, Andromeda, Battlestar Galactica.
Can we pause there, because that came out when I was in like year 11 and 12. Obsessed. And did you read the books?
I have not. It was not like in my top like
Okay,
sci-fi.
if I have one recommendation to everyone, it's go read the books. They are like the funniest things I've ever read. Like the things that are funny in the TV show, it just ramps it way up. Like I used to laugh out loud. I reread them so many times because the character's like Rimmer, because he's like awful. Like this is a guy who plays Risk against, in his like projections, like he can do holographic projections for entertainment. He plays Risk against like Napoleon and Hitler. He's that kind of grandiose narcissist. But in the book, it's just incredible. Like they were amazing books.
Red Dwarf's quite funny too. It's very much the vibe of like Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy.
Yeah.
That kind
I
of
was
like
gonna say.
absurdist science fiction a little bit.
Yeah, I was going to say Hitchhikers. I don't think it would have been the first sci-fi I read, but I remember reading it as a teenager and just finding it so delightful.
So funny.
Yeah.
The cat, like the way the cat civilization evolved from Lister's cat. It was so good.
Yeah. And I found that there was a brief period where I got into cyberpunk. I say got into, I read like 1.5 cyberpunk books.
Like, are we talking like William Gibson?
Yeah, Neuromancer and Snow Crash were the ones that I started on. But I think that one was something where I came to that through movies and video games and things, because I really liked The Matrix. Was huge in my household.
Same. I read a series called Hex, I believe is what it was called, when I was in high school, and because that was the same time, or it's just after The Matrix had come out, so it was really big to be like into coding and all that sort of, into computers and stuff. So yeah, cyberpunk. Again, I haven't read a ton of it, so I wouldn't say got into it, but was very interested by it because of The Matrix.
Yeah. So sorry to cut you off.
No, you're fine. I was just going to say that Star Wars is the thing in my house.
Yeah.
Mainly because for like the most recent ones, they were putting out Star Wars like almost yearly, every second year, at New Year's Eve time. And so it's a tradition in my house that we go to the cinema on New Year's and watch Star Wars.
Oh, we did that during the Lord of the Rings years. We'd go on Boxing Day and see Lord of the Rings.
Yeah.
Yeah, my family had a yearly tradition of seeing Lord of the Rings.
Phantom Menace was, I think, one of the earlier films I saw as a kid. So we went and saw that in the cinema when that came out.
Oh, see, I'm so old. I went to the drive-in when I was little to see Empire Strikes Back in a double feature with the Christopher Reeve Superman 2 movie.
Wow.
And I fell asleep about the time that I wasn't very old. I would have been 5 or 6. And I fell asleep when Yoda came on the screen.
There's something really nostalgic about falling asleep in the drive-in.
In the drive-in.
Yeah.
So to circle back around, Star Trek. I actually was married to someone for a while who's a Star Trekky person, and I was not. Like when I was young, it was like you liked Star Wars or Star Trek, and they were not the same things. But actually, then of course, when Next Generation came out, a lot of people watched both, and there was a whole cohort of people when I was at uni who were obsessed with Star Trek Next Gen. But one thing I noticed, because I'm not huge on, I find it a little bit cerebral for me. I like a little bit of emotion, obviously, and romance and guts and stuff. And I find Star Trek really leans into the thought experiment side of sci-fi. But one thing I noticed was, where were the queer people? Like, I used to watch it with him. I'm like, right, okay, so we've got a woman, we've got cyborgs, we've got different races. Like, and they kept holding up the different races as like this utopic thing. But then I was like, but where are the queer people?
Yeah, this is a problem with sci-fi in general, at large, I would say. Not that there aren't books and TV shows and movies that have had queer characters in them, but by and large, I feel like sci-fi is so far behind on queer rep, if we're going to call it that, than other genres, which just seems really silly given what science fiction is.
It feels like, we were saying this off pod, but it feels like the perfect vessel.
Yeah, and it's just so ironic that sci-fi seems so resistant to queer people.
I also feel that because when I was rummaging through my books, trying to find books that would be considered queer sci-fi, there were a few where I was like, oh, this might be considered queer spec fic, but not sci-fi. And there's a few ones where I feel like sometimes the queer books end up leaning or ending up more in like a slightly more literary, quote unquote literary genres, whereas sci-fi is seen, I feel like it's actually less seen this way, but it was seen as a bit more like in that genre sense where people look down on it rather than, does that make sense?
I agree.
Yeah.
But that's why they made spec fic a label, is so we could talk about the serious sci-fi. You know?
Exactly.
Yeah. They also do it with fantasy, right? They'll say spec fic instead of fantasy, and it's it's like a stamp of like, take this more seriously.
Yeah.
But I don't know, like, because when you do, I mean, science fiction is often a thought experiment, but also has leaned utopic or dystopic, right? You can so Star Trek is trying to envision a utopia, and then it seemed weird that I mean, it wasn't, except for Captain Kirk, it wasn't like hugely sexual until they objectified Seven of Nine and stuff. But it seemed weird that if you're imagining a utopia, kind of different variations of sexuality are just erased. And sorry, Abby, I might spoil something in Project Hail Mary, so just close your ears.
La 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 la
But
la.
like, that is also a film where sex is kind of erased.
Mm.
Did you find that? I mean, you could
Damn,
always
I was
read
really
it.
expecting so much sex going into that film. That was my number one.
I've also heard people talk a little bit, I haven't read
About
the
a
book,
guy
but
who's
I've
heard sex. Sorry. So sorry.
anything else?
No. We're
sex?
good. We're good.
Okay.
My rant is done.
I've read the book, but I've heard people talk about the book, and they said it's like there are obviously a lot of differences, but yes, they even played up. Obviously, people are picking up a romance between him and Strat, the woman who sends him to space. And that's like there's not even hinted at in the books, basically. So people are like, it's even weird that they've kind of played that up a little. But I even didn't.
I don't
I
think
didn't
they
get
did.
I didn't
that
pick that
vibe
up in
out
the
of
movie at
no.
all. Like, they didn't even occur
I think
to
that's
me.
us being socialized to read that.
It's been socialized to look at a man and a woman
Yeah.
in the
Yeah.
film and go, well, he must have a crush on her, I think.
Yeah.
But yeah, I agree. There was sort of, I mean,
Yeah.
he says that thing about he used to have a girlfriend, but that was really it.
But it really isn't an interest of his.
We hear more about the aliens part
Yeah.
of it.
Yeah.
I think it's a film that's much, much more interested in friendships and platonic connections between, you know, I'll say people and aliens and creatures.
But it's not even a thought
Yeah.
he has about going home. It's not even part of the idea of going back to Earth is for any kind of romance or sex or so it is. But I do find it interesting that often there is an erasure of sexuality in sci-fi as well. Like, we get so cerebral that we don't need that anymore. That seems to occur as well in sci-fi. Would you agree?
And you often run into the problem, we were talking about this earlier as well, that in a lot of sci-fi franchises, media, where they will have queer characters, it's a lot of the time the aliens are queer, or the aliens don't have gender, they're non-binary.
Or they're multi-gendered.
Or they're robots, like with
Yeah.
the Martha Wells books, which is not me saying we shouldn't have that, that's terrible, but it's like for a while that was kind of all it was. And so the other still had to be the other. We couldn't just have, like in Star Trek, you didn't just have queer humans. It was always like, well, these aliens are a bit queer.
But I feel like in something like Star Trek, I think at least in cinema and TV, like there is that like legacy of Hays Code of queer characters needing to be punished on screen if they exist. And I wonder how much that plays into it, especially when you're going back to older series where, I mean, again, making a lot of assumptions about a show I've not seen and don't know anything really about the backstory.
You've never
of how it's
ever seen
creation.
the Star Trek episode?
No, I've never seen an episode of it. I watched the
Yeah,
awful
neither.
movies
I've seen, like,
that Star Trek
bits and
fans
pieces
tell us
ones.
to watch. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
I
But
feel like that's almost a claim to, like, that's some kind of status thing. It's like never having seen a Marvel film or a Star Wars film or like it's like
I
that's
don't know.
kind of
Star
amazing.
Trek just didn't yeah. I think maybe it's because it was that thing you were talking about, this idea that you're a Star Wars or Star Trek.
Yeah.
And then the sci-fi that my parents liked, they were Star Wars more
Yeah.
so than Star Trek. So yeah. But all this to say that like their way of sneaking queerness in might be through things like aliens that you can kind of fudge with authorities and broadcasters.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
Definitely. But
we now don't have to
we
do
don't
that.
have to do that anymore.
Yeah.
We've got books that just straight up have queer people in them now.
Yeah.
So let's circle back to sci-fi as a genre because we haven't really introduced it. I just dove straight in. Yeah, I mean, it's a very old genre. Like, it's one of the first literary, because the novel in the West is so young, right? It's the sort of late 18th century thing. And yet some of the very first novels were by women and were sci-fis. We're going to throw over to Millie
Mary
here.
Shelley's Frankenstein.
This is your editor, Peyton here. I just also want to add a reference to a novel by Margaret Cavendish, originally titled The Description of a New World, called The Blazing World. Cavendish was the Duchess of Newcastle, as well as a writer and philosopher, and this book was published way back in 1666. As such, it's been described as a forerunner to sci-fi. From Penguin, part utopian fiction, part feminist text, it tells of a lady shipwrecked in the blazing world where she is made empress and uses her power to ensure that it is free of war, religious division, and unfair sexual discrimination. Sorry for the interruption, let's get back to the episode.
Which is really, I think, because we've always wondered about the stars, and we've always wondered about technology, and because we're always advancing as a species with our technology, it is very easy to imagine new technologies and then imagine a world around the possibility of that technology. Like Asimov read about robots, and even Frank Herbert was writing about space travel, and kind of, he wasn't writing about robots technically because it's set after a big robot war, but like, I think people, and even Ray Bradbury was writing about sort of concepts that didn't exist yet. There's a term for it, and now I can't remember what it is, but whoever's editing the episode can put it in here. I'll email them. That's basically like science fiction writers writing about things that then became true.
Yes,
So
yes.
you know,
Prophetic
Star Trek with
visions.
prophetic vision. Exactly, that's the technical term. But you know, sort of envisioning
Like
phones
mobile
and
phones,
tablets before we had them. So we've always sort of done that, I think. So it's
That was, I mean, yeah. I guess, like, I don't know. Will alert that after I read this book, which I loved, and then I found out that the author is a heinous person, but I remember reading Ender's Game and being
I know, I didn't mention it for this reason.
yeah, I'm
'cause
sorry.
I loved those
Nobody
books.
buy that book anyway.
Yeah.
I read it because Amy said it, so I can blame
did
Amy.
before the-
Wow.
Yeah.
But yeah, I read that book and I was like, wow, it's incredible that this predicted so much about the way that we use the internet and
Yeah.
things that I hadn't come across before.
And then the
in
later
sci-fi.
books like Speaker for the Dead and Xenocide are like philosophically amazing. But
Anyway,
yeah.
nobody buy these
No,
books.
it's
Anyway.
sad. It's just sad.
But then even books like, we talking about Project Hail Mary, The Martian, the book, when it came out, the science was sound when he wrote it. And then I think it was like a couple of months after the book came out, they discovered the water on Mars. So he was just like, God damn it. But it's still a good book.
I find it really interesting, the idea that science fiction needs to be in some way like logistical, like you need to believe in the science, because I know very little about science, very little about technology, and so I go into them and to me they're a fantasy space, but like in space. Like I don't care at all how accurate it is. If you tell me that's how it works, that's how it works.
Yeah. And
That's
that's
It's
why they
definitely a
define,
spectrum.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they define it like between
Hard and
hard
soft
hard and
science, yeah.
soft.
Which is the
find-
same with fantasy, right? You have kind of those both ends of the spectrum
Yes.
where you have
Yes.
a hard magic system and a soft magic system.
Yeah, I find there's also like a level of I find it funny when people critique sci-fi by saying, oh, but XYZ science thing is like impossible, or like they're critiquing the the science behind it. And I was like, you do forget that there is fiction, like it is fictional. Like
It's
it is
novel, yeah.
imagining stuff that doesn't exist. Even like I guess the
There's an
near
alien in
future
this
things where it's like close to our technology tends to be where people go hard on it. But I was like, at some level you do have to like play in the space and imagine.
Suspend your disbelief a little bit,
Yeah.
please. Feel joy.
Yeah, exactly. But I also prefer books that get really into the nitty gritty of the world building. So, I'm just going to... holding up Becky Chambers' The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet. These books are great, and I feel like were really pitched when I first read them as a kind of, I suppose, soft sci-fi romp. I was told it was going to be like gay, like lesbian space romp. And I read it and it's absolutely not that, but it's amazing, I think. But it's very detailed into, like the world building in this series is really detailed into like how these different societies function. And that's the stuff I found so interesting, is like how different species of aliens like relate to each other, what kind of societies exist, how you bring together people who are coming from such completely different like modes of experience and what that looks like. And I really enjoyed that aspect of it, which I would say is probably more along the lines of hard sci-fi, but because it's not about like how does the air filtration system work on the spaceship, it's more about like how does this society work, how do people relate to each other.
Yeah.
It's, I don't know.
Because in those shades of grey, like when we're talking hard and soft and can things work, so you know, there is, when you teach science fiction, there's to creative writing students, there's a line about how it is a thought experiment, that you take this thing and play it out, which is what you're describing there. But then that's not what Star Wars is doing, right? But I do think that a lot of sci-fi is doing that, is it's taking an idea like Frankenstein does, right? Like what if man could create life, not woman within her womb, but man create life? What kind of hubris is that? What responsibility do we have? What can go wrong? Like all of those things about new technologies, that's kind of interesting.
But the thing, like you mentioned Star Wars, that's when you get into the interesting crossover of genres and the idea that something can be two things. So like Star Wars, I always think is fantasy set in space. Yeah, I really do believe that. And
I think the same of Dune. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's my
A
opinion.
little bit. No, like you're totally right, because when you're reading it feels very fantasy, but it's very rooted in a lot of hard sci-fi actually, like hard sci-fi terms and like this is how this works and this, but it does feel very fantastical when you're reading it, maybe because of the setting. And then like Gideon the Ninth, that series is sci-fi technically because they're on spaceships in space, but it's so rooted in fantasy, I think. So there's that interesting crossover of the genres.
Yeah, no, that relates to what we were talking a little bit about this off pod, the idea that when you see queer rep, seeing it in the more fantasy sci-fi stuff, then like, is there a reason behind that? Is the reason that we're not reading enough hard sci-fi, so we don't know which ones are gay?
I do wonder why. Yeah, good question. I do wonder because I there is a kind of myth about sci-fi being a masculinized space.
I was going to ask this, yeah.
Yeah.
What we think about that.
I think it's, I think from the outside it can definitely look like that. And I think especially maybe fan-wise, like fans of things, there is that idea of like groups of men being Trekkies and that sort of stuff. But it's just not true anymore. Women read sci-fi.
I also
Everyone
feel
reads
like,
sci-fi.
sometimes I feel like, I live in a parallel universe of sci-fi because I'm like, but the biggest sci-fi authors to me are like, Becky Chambers, N.K. Jemisin, Ursula Le Guin, Octavia Butler.
Yeah.
I was just like, men write sci-fi? I know they do. But it's also just like, I just feel like women have always been there. And
I think that's true. I think that's a blindness because I don't know why my brain went to sport there, but
no, women don't do that one.
It's because you said groups of men, like fans and groups of men do it together, and I suddenly jumped to like fantasy football and stuff. And I was thinking about the myth that men love sport and not anyone else. And actually, it has always been a diverse audience. It's just they don't recognise it. And it's a little bit like I was in a talk recently about romance readership and about whether men read it, and it's like, well, they absolutely do. It's just that a lot of them are invisible to people reading it. And I think that's often happened, is that the like Star Trek community or the fan community around sci-fi has, or like gaming is another really good example, where you say, imagine a gamer and people are imagining a certain kind of man, but actually the gaming community is really diverse, and I think sci-fi authorship and readership is really diverse.
Which just made me think, talking about gaming, because yes, if you say picture a gamer, obviously most people are going to picture but if you say picture a cozy gamer, people are going to picture a woman.
Something
and I
different,
wonder if women are often, not that it's bad to write soft sci-fi, but I wonder if women are often relegated in people's minds to writing sci-fi, which is of course not the good sci-fi. It must be hard sci-fi to be good. But do you know what I mean? Like Asimov and Frank Herbert are writing hard sci-fi, and Ursula Le Guin wrote that stuff about the left hand of darkness.
But I feel like it then just goes back to these like cultural constructions around what masculinity means, and the idea that masculinity is the logical one that's interested in
cerebral.
That's interested in ideas of whatever and like scientific things and et cetera, et cetera.
Whereas women are interested in the relationships.
It's so interesting to me because when I read a science fiction, even if it is a hard science book, I'm not, like when I recall that book, I'm not thinking about how the filtration system worked. I'm thinking about the relationships that were occurring in that book. Or like the really cool, scene where he's in, the spaceship or whatever. But like I'm not thinking about the science behind it. It is, so I feel like, the stories you carry away from it aren't the hard science.
Did you guys ever read Carl Sagan?
No.
Yeah, I mean, that's really hard science.
Yeah.
There's a lot of info dumping of the hard
I say
science.
I read it. I certainly read the words with my eyes. I don't know if I comprehended it.
I do that even with Martha Wells sometimes. I'm like, blah, 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 science word.
Yeah.
You entered the spaceship. Like,
I get the important bit.
I enjoyed it, but I'm also, my eyes are reading. But
I like a balance of it. Like I love the world building details and I like the character relationships. I think having both is super important. And I find that, when it does both, that's when the ones that really stick with me. Like actually one of Becky Chambers' books that I like that really, really got me was To Be Taught If Fortunate, which I have recommended before on our Instagram, because it like genuinely, like I was crying because of space. And it's like, it's not even about necessarily anything particularly touching or particularly sad happening. It's just this idea of how we relate to finding new knowledge and existing in the universe and what that means for us. It's like the marriage between the like science and the fact that we are like living, feeling beings who and engaging with science is still engaging with that part of ourselves.
I agree 100%. I think you're right on the money that it's about the balance, because the science and the conceptual stuff and the cerebral stuff is very interesting to me, but it doesn't mean anything if it's not also about people. Like I've been crying so much the past 2 weeks because of the Artemis 2 mission. Yeah. And like, it's like, yes, space, and we're going to space and we're doing space things, but then also all these little tidbits about them and their team. You're like, and we're just people and we're all people on Earth and they're going to space for us, you know, like it's about a balance between the two.
And my family could not understand why I was obsessed. They're like, you don't care about space or astronauts. And I was like,
today.
I do now. Like, have you seen them? I do now.
Did you guys, sorry, this is like supposed to read or see The Three Body Problem?
I haven't seen it because I've been meaning to read it, and it's become one of those books where I'm like, no, I want to read that one before I watch it. Yeah, and then I do
it the other way around, because either way you do it, it's quite interesting, because obviously the Netflix show is, commercial. And like I got obsessed. I'd watched it when I had COVID, and I was like just chained it. And I think I was.
So you were delirious
I was
too.
Delirious, but I got obsessed. I was like, I'll just put this on, and then I chained the entire thing. And then I got the book. And what's interesting about the book is because it emerges from China, it's not about individuals in the same way. So it's an ensemble cast. But it really is much more of a collective kind of position. And I would love your take on it one day. You ever want to watch or see it. Like, I think you have to read the book and watch it because it really is about humans' relationship to space and nature and each other. And it's just, I would love your take one.
Which I find not all across the board, but very commonly is what queer books are about. It's about, like, Justine, you talked about Becky Chambers a lot, about how her books very much center community. So even if, like, the queer characters are queer, it's not necessarily about romance. But it is about family, it's about community, and I do find that a lot of queer books are like that, and I think that melds so well with the idea of space and how we feel about space as human beings.
So that's a nice entry point into, I guess, queerness in sci-fi. And when you first encountered it, did you have to go looking for it? Like, because I was trying to rack my brains about how many I've read that are queer. And I do think of things like the first one that came to mind was Anne Leckie's Ancillary Justice, and that was more about genders.
Yes,
I guess.
Yeah.
It's certainly newer books. I was going through my bookshelf of books I have physically, and there were not a lot, but I know I've read a lot in the past 10 years, but I have moved to audiobooks and ebooks, so I don't have physical copies of them. But there's been way more in the last 10 years than there were when I was a kid.
I genuinely don't remember the first queer sci-fi book I read. Because, I don't know. I have such a clear memory of the first queer fantasy book I read, but not for sci-fi. I wonder why. Anyway, I don't have
technically for me, I guess it is Left Hand of Darkness.
Yeah.
Ursula Le Guin. But like I was saying off pod before, I love this book and I love Ursula Le Guin. And I think it's so forward for its time. And I think she was also always forward for her time. But now reading it, I'm like, this is kind of like Gender 101 for straight people, a little bit. Like, not that that's bad, but it's more like...
that's what it gets taught as
what else
often
can
at
you do?
universities.
I sort of go in full circle with this, because I was saying before, a lot of the time the aliens are queer or et cetera, et cetera. But now I'm kind of like, well, okay, let's lead into... I borrow a little bit from friend of the pod, Riley's view on horror, which is like, well, let's just dig into the stereotype. Maybe the aliens are queer, and let's make them really queer. Yeah. That would have been the first one, I reckon. She got rejected
so many times for that book before it got published. And the rejections weirdly are about form, not the content so much. They're about the anthropological notes, and no one's going to sit through that. Here it is, all these years later, people are still reading it.
Sorry, that's so funny to me, being like, this is the nerd genre for nerds, but no one wants to read the anthropological notes.
I know, the science bit. No one wants the science bit when a woman does it.
I was like, okay.
Oh dear. Yeah, I wonder, I mean, like I was saying before, I wonder, because she was a woman maybe, like, well, we can't,
Yeah, and the idea
Maybe.
is anthropology. That's not quite
That's not
hard science
real.
enough.
The other one, when I was teaching, and some of you may have done this topic, but years ago I used to do a historical fiction topic, and I opened with prehistoric fiction and talked about how it's basically science fiction. Like, because there was this huge boom after the Clan of the Cave Bear, with all these prehistoric human books. Do you remember these? There were a lot of them, the reindeer hunters, there were a heap of them.
Unfortunately, I hear prehistoric and just go straight to dinosaurs. So,
No, dinosaurs and humans do not overlap except in Jurassic Park, which we could ask his dad.
It is
It is
definitely
sci-fi.
sci-fi,
I did
yeah.
ask yesterday, my housemate, I was like, should I take Jurassic
That is
Park?
totally a sci-fi. Yeah.
I mean, all the dinosaurs are women, so
That was
gay.
my point. I was like, well, they're all women
So
and
they're
then they
gay.
have children, so...
So they're gay dinosaurs. They are genderqueer dinosaurs too.
Yeah.
Anyway, where was I? I was talking about
Cavemen.
sorry,
Prehistoric.
my bad. I feel like I'm good at that.
Yeah, but again, it's a science, right?
Yeah.
Like, and it's how do you take this science and make it fiction? Like, how do you tell a story? But that's what historical fiction is doing as well. It's like, how do we take this learning we have and this knowledge and these thoughts we're having about this stuff and explore it through fiction?
because it's that same way, in the same way that we can't really truly access the future, we can't truly access the past either. Like, you can do as much research as you can, but you will not ever be, able to really experience it when you're going back to like a prehistoric time.
Yeah, and they're both constructs. We're constructing backwards and forwards.
Yeah. It's all speculative.
It's all made up.
All speculative. I'm trying to think now of all these books. I should have brought my phone
Well,
with me.
on the topic of like dinosaurs being considered science fiction, a lot of these books are like apocalyptic, and what I would call apocalyptic fiction. Do they cross with science fiction? Because in my brain, I would never have said to me, like, science fiction, you're in space.
Yeah.
Like, that's the hard
That's it.
definition.
Obviously, it's like dystopian
It's
is
called
kind of
space
What
fi.
about
Space-fi.
because one of the early sci-fis was Jules Verne. What is it? 20? What is it? 20,000 Leagues?
20,000 Leagues
Yeah.
Under the Sea.
I was going to say 50, and I'm like, that's not right.
Whoa,
that's too far.
That's too many.
That's
too
too
many
many
leagues.
You've gone way too deep.
How much
Amy
is
Kaufman
it?
just talked about that being a
Yeah.
really integral book.
Yeah.
Yeah.
To answer your question, Abby, I feel like dystopia is almost its own genre at this point because we have so many of them. But obviously, I feel like they fit under fantasy dystopia, science fiction dystopia. So I count zombies as science fiction dystopia because it is that idea of like, what if a medical thing happened to the human race?
It is very science-based.
There is,
Yeah.
but I think there's like a range, right? Because there are zombies that are more magic than science related. So it sits across a bunch of different
I mean,
genres.
zombies are originally magic, right? Like that's their...
I mean, I think it originates from sort of relatively racist ideas about
super well, because the original zombies weren't actually what we think. I've done a whole sort of research project on it, but yes, that's for another time. But yes, you're right. Like they can be magical and they can be more science. So if there is more of that sciencey, like people have been turned via virus, then yeah, it's absolutely science fiction.
But I think because they're so entwined with the apocalyptic space, they're more and more often sci-fi nowadays because it's linked to either a virus or in Last of Us it's like a fungus.
Because zombies are so linked to what our fears are of the moment as a race, because we're so worried about science and technology now. That tends to be what the flavor of zombies is.
I feel like, I forget that like science fiction are two words and science is one of them. Instead of like sci-fi, to me, it's just like sci-fi is space. And so like, if there is
Aliens.
science involved and it's very heavily science
then
based,
is-
then it's science fiction,
Is
right?
E.T. sci-fi?
Yes.
Involves space.
There's some space involved.
There's a
alien.
creature from space.
The other film I loved, and I still love, it's in my top 3, I think, is Close Encounters of the Third Kind. Like classic Spielberg film. That's sci-fi.
Yeah.
Well, then I guess, on the topic of apocalyptic and E.T., any of the ones where they're apocalyptic and it's because aliens have...
War of the
Yeah,
Worlds.
War of the Worlds.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's
The Thing
science
is
fiction.
Science fiction, you know.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of sci-fi horror that always
Yes.
crosses over.
Well, you were talking about
'Cause we're scared
Alien.
of
Yeah.
space.
We're terrified of space. We cannot survive it.
But the Alien movies are great. Like, yeah, they're the example of the crossover of sci-fi and horror. Because
They're just incredible.
Yeah.
And I also brought the book based on the movie because it is formative for lesbians.
I've
And I believe
never
it's
seen
also
any of
formative
the
sometimes for
aliens.
gender as well.
Yeah.
She's very gender in that film.
well, I mean, that's the story, right? That the character was originally written as a male character.
heard-
I don't know if
I've
that's
heard
true
a
or
couple-
not, but this
I've
is
heard
what I've
that
heard.
They were all
were
written gender.
written
flat.
ungendered and then they just
Yeah.
cast people, but
Yeah.
it makes a difference.
They were all just
Yeah.
surnames with no sort of defining characteristics, right?
Yeah, because there's Ripley and then there's the other woman whose name I can never
One
remember
who
with the
screams
buzz
all the
cut.
time.
Yeah.
Who is from The Sound of Music, by the way. She played Brigida in The Sound of Music.
Oh.
She has the longest career. Was also in Lost in Space. So has been in a lot of space films.
And
Lost in
but
Space,
there is also
sci-fi.
so much gender stuff in the Alien films, so much
Yeah.
like horror in
Body
like
horror,
reproduction
women's
and
bodies.
yeah.
And that. And
What
the,
if
oh,
it
the
was the
alien
man
is
who got pregnant?
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh my.
What if yeah.
I've never seen an alien film, but I'm
have
scared.
to. Yeah,
I don't
no,
like
you
anything
watch
horror.
it in daytime then.
Yeah, but I
it-
really want to because you talk so
they're
often about how good they
incredible.
are.
They're
They're
just
scary.
incredible. The first one, particularly.
Yeah, I know I'll
love-
be scared. I
I
feel like
love
now
the
that
series,
they
but
look
the
old
first
enough.
one is one of the best films ever made.
A lot of jump
Like,
scares and a lot of it's a lot of that anticipatory fear of knowing something's out there but not seeing it. Yeah.
Yeah, one of those films you watch like this.
yeah,
it's
it is
rough.
scary.
It's
scary.
I watched them later in life. I didn't watch them when I was younger. I've only watched them in the last 10 years or so, 15 years or so. It's rough, but it's worth it because they're really good films. At least the first 2 or 3 are. And the new one that came out really recently was quite good too. I feel like we talked about this in horror last year.
Probably.
Yeah,
Probably.
yeah. But like you
the
said, I mean, there's a
crossover.
lot that scares us about the future, about space, about human fragility.
Well, this is where I find it such a fascinating genre. In that, like, yeah, there's you mentioned earlier the idea of like imagining the future as utopic or dystopic. It's that where like ricocheting, I feel like, between being hopeful about what technology can offer us and terrified of the implications of what it might do. Alien seems to sit more on the terrified side, but I do find it interesting when it combines the social and the scientific
Yeah.
because, you know, you can't really separate them, I don't think. And Alien is also just like a capitalist
I know.
dystopia.
It was so prophetic.
Yeah.
Like speaking of, but not in a good way.
Yeah.
But Weyland-Yutani is like, oh, that's where we are. Like with Amazon and Meta, and like we are in the space where you don't belong to a nation, you belong to a corporation almost.
Yeah, and that's also one of the like driving forces of cyberpunk was this idea of imagining a future where governments have dissolved and corporations run, you know, society.
Yeah.
Um,
So we did YA month obviously as well, and I was thinking during YA month that there is a lot of sci-fi in the YA space.
A bunch of these are YA actually, yeah.
Yeah, it does seem a time of life where those concerns are really, really centered.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think you said at the top of the episode, like sci-fi is really having a boom at the moment. And it's because
Yeah,
we're so
I feel like it makes sense.
worried and hopeful, but mostly worried about what's going on with technology in space, but also on Earth. Like we're so worried about corporations owning our bodies and getting plugged
Did
into
you
the
see-
matrix. And
And also
Sideways,
just
did
the
you see
state of the world
this was in the
environmentally.
news, and by the time this app comes out, it will be older news, but this blew me away that the Meta glasses, have you seen the women being harassed by people who just walk up to them with the Meta glasses and stuff, so on beaches, but now they want to introduce a function of it where it tells you who the person is. It flicks through databases, so if say I
That's
walked up
science
to
fiction.
Justina on the beach and it would say, Justina Ashman, tell me what city they lived in, where they're like doing university, what, like all that
is
stuff.
this data that they're mining from Facebook? They're like, where are they getting the data? Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Of course, it's going to be appalling.
That is so science fiction. That feels like a episode of like Black Mirror.
Yeah.
Black Mirror, also sci-fi.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Also has queer sci-fi in it. That might be some of the early queer sci-fi that I watched at least. Actually, not really. Sorry, I was like, no, I definitely watched
Take
very
that back.
gay episodes of like Doctor Who, for example. But
Doctor Who we
yeah.
didn't talk about, actually.
Yeah.
That's an interesting one.
Also never seen an episode
Yeah.
of that.
Doctor Who for
Really?
me falls in
Yeah.
with those like Hitchhiker's Guide because it's maybe just because it's British. Maybe it's the way the British do sci-fi, but that kind of
Yeah.
weird absurdist. He's a guide. He travels around in a police box.
Hitchhiker's Guide, that would be what I remember. That there was a BBC series of it that came out when I was like really young that my parents watched. That would be one of my early exposures to sci-fi as well.
I feel like superhero movies were very early exposed.
Well,
to
Superman, is
sci-
that
yeah,
sci-fi?
because-
He's an alien.
Yeah.
Yes, it is.
Yeah,
Just
well, and
'cause
then, like, if you go
superheroes
into
have
the
their
Avengers, they
own
go into
genre.
space.
Yeah, it doesn't mean it's not sci-fi.
And superheroes often also are very like technology. They have like, you know, you think of like an Iron Man.
But even
Very
X-Men,
solid.
right? Like that's
Yeah.
still science fiction because it's an
Oh,
idea
no,
of
it's-
genes and mutations.
That's
Spider-Man?
the first gay sci-fi.
Spider-Man,
because
yeah.
because all X-Men are gay. That was my first gay sci-fi.
Ah, we did it.
Yeah, we
Episode
found
over.
it.
Obviously, some superheroes have magical powers for sure, but like so many of them are like you got radiated, you got bitten by a spider, you got definitely sci-fi.
Well, I feel like we only scratched the surface, so luckily we've got a whole month on it.
Yeah.
Even when we have a whole month, I feel like we
Oh,
don't
yeah.
get to
We
go
can-
into it as often as we want
That's
to.
the joy of
What do you
many
mean?
more years to come.
Are you trying to tell me that it takes more than a month to
unra-
talk about the entire sci-fi genre?
I know, sorry, yeah.
Shocking to me.
I'm trying to think if we didn't touch on anything.
We will come back around. So join us for the entire month. So it's Pride Month. Happy Pride Month, everyone. And we are thrilled to also announce that our book of the month is Alison Evans' Ida, which we haven't read yet, but Justina is highly recommending. Do you want to tell us something about it?
Just that Alison Evans is a really great Australian author writing in YA middle grade sci-fi and fantasy. And to be quite frank, I have not read Ida yet. I'm reading it this month.
Oh,
But
exciting. So you do get to read it
I
with
really
us.
love Highway Bodies. Again, another book that's already made an appearance on my Instagram recommendations, which is Highway Bodies is my favorite zombie novel basically ever. And it's a very queer, very Australian zombie apocalypse. And I'm really excited to get stuck into Ida.
So
Yeah.
what's amazing about this, so it's doing a few things. So it's got like multiple universes and you get to choose, like she has to choose which universe to belong to. But also it's got doppelgangers. It's got, it just looks really fun. I started reading it this morning. I flipped through it when I picked it up.
And it's supposed to be extremely gender. Like,
Yeah, all
it's
gender.
the gender of it all.
Love
We
gender.
love
It's the
to see
gender of it all.
here.
So,
Love gender, you know what I mean?
go grab your copy of Alison Evans' Ida, and we'll be doing our book of the month this month. And we'll see you all next week for more Queer Sci-Fi.
Hooray!
Yay!
Bye.